The teams that I thought had the best drafts this year were as follows. You got the Jets, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Baltimore Ravens, the Detroit Lions, and my Philadelphia Eagles. Now, taking this by a case by case basis, you have the New York Jets, who with the number 4 pick and I think Sauce Gardner, the defensive back out of Cincinnati. Now, at number 3 overall, the Houston Texans went ahead and took the defensive back Derek Stingley Jr. out of LSU. Jets got a corner. Now, I did not do a full mock draft this year. Did not have time, again, with the new job and stuff. Did not have time to do a full mock draft. But I've seen a lot of mock drafts saying the Jets could have taken an offensive tackle, and I would have not argued with that. There are certainly reports that they could move on from Mekhi Becton. But I thought getting Sauce Gardner for their defense was huge, considering that the Robert Saleh runs a lot of press man coverage. Then at number 10, there were reports they could have went out and got Deebo Samuel, who of course has made himself available. He does not want to be in San Francisco anymore. Instead, the Jets went out and they got, in my opinion, the second best wide receiver. I would have taken Jameson Williams out of Alabama, which the Lions, who again I'll get to in a second, went up and traded for. But in my opinion, Garrett Wilson, the second best wide receiver in this year's draft, I think he could be a number 1 right away. It's certainly, not as rare as it has been over the last couple of seasons. We've seen Jamar Chase, we've seen Justin Jefferson, we've seen AJ Brown. We've seen these receivers kind of come into the league and light it up right away. I wouldn't be surprised if Garrett Wilson does that for the Jets. They also got the Tremaine Johnson, a defensive lineman, so they added more to their pass rush. They got the tight end out of Ohio State, which some people thought was the best tight end in the draft in the second round. So to go along with Elijah Moore, to go along with Corey Davis. They also got the running back Breece Hall. I believe he was out of Iowa State in the second round, who I think is the best running back in the draft. So the Jets, they really focused on offensive talent and aiding to Zach Wilson. And now moving on to Kansas City. They ended up replacing Tyreek Hill essentially with Sky Moore. They traded up with the New England Patriots. They got the corner McDuffie out of Washington. Kansas City really focused this draft on getting defensive backs and improving their secondary, which was their huge weakness. We just saw Tyrann Mathieu leave for the Saints. I thought the Chiefs addressed a lot of needs in this draft. The Baltimore Ravens. Now, they lucked out because Kyle Hamilton fell to them at number 14 overall. I thought that was a great pick. That was a Raven-like player that they needed. They took in Jabo, the defensive lineman out of Michigan, who, if he works out after a torn ACL, sounds like he's not going to play during the 2022 season. But if he works out, that's going to be a great pick for them. They ended up taking Linderbaum, the best center in the draft, out of Iowa after they traded away Hollywood Brown to the Arizona Cardinals, and they got a first-round draft pick back for him. So with all of these moves, they also picked up an additional couple tight ends. The one thing I did not think Baltimore did was address wide receiver, but they are doubling down on Lamar Jackson's skill set, which is running the football, playing good defense, and throwing the football to tight ends. It is very much Raven-like football, and the Ravens were 8-3 last year. And as much as we talk about Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert and Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson and these unreal quarterbacks in the NFL, the regular season, the Philadelphia Eagles led the league in rushing last year. They made the playoffs. Tennessee was the number 1 seed in the AFC because they ran the football. Obviously, they didn't have A.J. Brown or Julio Jones or Derrick Henry for a lot of the season, and they still won 12 games. We'll get to Tennessee, obviously, here in a minute because they made a big splash selecting Malik Willis. So I do think that running the football, you can still win regular season games with that. Again, I don't know how much effect it will have in the postseason, but I thought Baltimore doubled down. They improved their secondary a lot, which they absolutely needed to do. It felt like every player that they wanted, they got the corner out of Alabama. It felt like every player they wanted fell to them, and it felt like Baltimore just did a very productive draft, getting a Linderbaum the center, which they needed the offensive line help. Again, Kyle Hamilton, these guys are going to be absolute studs for them. Next up, the Detroit Lions, who completely lucked out when the Jacksonville Jaguars did not take Aiden Hutchinson, number 1 overall. I thought personally he should have been the number 1 pick and go to Jacksonville. Yet Aiden Hutchinson is from Michigan. He's a Detroit boy. You know Dan Campbell and the Detroit Lions are going to love to have him. I thought that was a great pick. And then they traded up in their division. They went from the last pick in the first round, number 32. They gave that to the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, they earned that pick in the Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford trade from a year ago. But they moved up 20 spots, and they got Jared Goff, a receiver, in Jameson Williams. So I know he had the ACL injury at Alabama, but as I said a little bit earlier with the Jets pick, I think this guy is a freak of nature. I think he can do it all. And if he's healthy, I think he's going to come in day one and light this league up and be a number 1 wide receiver. And listen, Jared Goff played well at home last year. We don't know how well he's going to play outside of a dome, outside of Detroit. Obviously, they get Minnesota, which is in a dome, so that is beneficial. But I thought the Lions now, with TJ Hockenson, Amon St. Brown, Jameson Williams, DeAndre Swift, Aiden Hutchinson, they added pieces all over the field. And the way that this team lost a bunch of close games last year, you don't think that's going to happen again. And I'm here to say it. I think the Detroit Lions are on the rise. And the final team that I had as one of my best drafts this year was my Philadelphia Eagles. I have been very critical of general manager Howie Roseman's draft decisions over the year. He drafted a fireman, Danny Watkins, at 26 years old, who was out of the league in the first round. He's drafted Kevin Cobb, who was supposed to be Donovan McNabb's replacement, did not work out. He's drafted Marcus Smith, a first-round defensive end that was out of the league in 3 years. Drafted Jalen Rager, drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. We know those receivers have not worked out. Drafted Sidney Jones, the defensive back who tore his Achilles from Washington, or he was going to be a top 10 pick. Did not work out in the Philadelphia Eagles uniform. But folks, I got to tell you something. Howie Roseman, unlike Dallas, who is typically a good drafting team, I thought Dallas had one of their worst drafts in years. I thought the Eagles had the best draft in my lifetime. Jordan Davis, defensive tackle out of Georgia. Howie Roseman moves up 1 spot ahead of Baltimore because all signs were pointing the Ravens were going to take him. Howie Roseman wanted Jordan Davis out of Georgia, a big man that will clog the middle of the defense, and he will learn from one of the best defensive tackles in the game in Fletcher Cox. Then he goes out on that same night, and like I just said, after the Lions traded for Jameson Williams, my heart sank because that was the guy who at number 15, if the Eagles would have stayed at 15, I wanted to take, and I thought he would be there at 15. But obviously, when the runner receivers happened with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, that was no longer going to be the case. So Howie Roseman goes out, and he gives up our first-round pick, our second first-round pick, which we had for that night, as well as a third-round pick, and went out and got A.J. Brown, a man who was never thrown the ball legitimately in Tennessee, even though, again, they had great receivers to go along with Derrick Henry. But when you have Derrick Henry, you have to run the football. And this man and Jalen Hurts are best friends, and they are going to have a real connection. And it's going to open up the field for Devontae Smith, who went out faced the number 2 best corner instead of the number 1 best corner. It will open up the field for Dallas Goedert and the tight end game. It will do wonders, hopefully, for Jalen Hurts, and will elevate this Eagles offense to the next level, which is in a running. Hopefully, it'll be more of like run, pass, run. A little bit more balance, and really give Jalen Hurts that number 1 wide receiver that Joe Burrow got in Jamar Chase, that Kirk Cousins got in Justin Jefferson, that Kyler Murray got in DeAndre Hopkins. You have to go out and you have to acquire these receivers. I don't blame Howie Roseman one bit. I thought it was a great pick. Then he went out and got our future center in Cam Urges, who reminds me a lot of Jason Kelsey at pick 51. Now, when that pick was initially announced, I was upset because I wanted to go with Nakobe Dean, the linebacker out of Georgia, and it was reported that he was falling because of injury concerns because he had a torn pec and he did not want to get surgery. And I am here to say I did not give a rip. I would have taken him in the second round. I thought he was the best linebacker in the draft. Not only that, but I thought he was the best defensive player on the national champion Georgia Bulldogs last season. Howie Roseman, this man stole Nakobe Dean in the third round of the NFL draft. This man is not injured. This man is going to participate in training camp, rookie training camp next week. And this man is going to be the first legitimate linebacker my Philadelphia Eagles have had in years. And I mean years. Every other NFL team is going to regret passing on to Kobe Dean, who was without a doubt in my mind the steal of the draft, and the man that Howie Roseman finally drafted, a linebacker. Folks, for years, it's been the Eagles were the ones that were laughed at. How many times I mentioned Cindy Jones, India Arcega-Whiteside, Jalen Reagor, passing on these great talents. And the Eagles have forgone linebacker. They've gone with off the street linebackers for years. This was the biggest glaring hole on our defense outside of secondary, which is the one spot we did not address. But again, as always, you can address positions post-draft. This isn't like it's the final roster at all. More moves are going to be made. But I got to give credit to Howie Roseman, man. Not only to Kobe Dean, but then in the sixth round, getting that Cade Castera, the tight end out of a UAB who was at Oklahoma. He transferred because he had way too many concussions. He was going to be a second round pick if it wasn't for his injuries. So again, adding more weapons to Jalen Hurts' arsenal. I did not mind giving up the amount of draft picks we did. This is a go for it now division with still the weak Washington football team. In my opinion, the Washington Commanders, whatever you want to call it, with Carson Wentz at quarterback. The Giants have a nice draft within the trenches, but no one's really scared of Daniel Jones. And then Dallas, who I thought next to New England, which don't get me started on New England. They took two running backs. They took a receiver who was supposed to go in the fifth round and the second round. They took a guard who was supposed to go in the fourth round, Cole Strange, in the first round out of Chattanooga. Sean McVay and the Rams thought he'd be there late in the third round going into the fourth round. Bill Belichick took him at pick 29. Nobody understood really what New England was doing. And then Dallas, obviously, again, taking the tackle, that had some issues with bullying and, brawling and fighting. And then, just not having a good draft. Being the defensive end, that as it's mentioned, it was not a good draft for the Dallas Cowboys. In my opinion, they took a lot of risk. And so when I look at the worst drafts, I see New England and Dallas, and obviously the best drafts, I got the Chiefs, Jets, Ravens, Eagles, Lions. So this is how after all the draft went down, I went down and I broke down the NFL standings and I broke down the playoff picture. Now, obviously, this is going to change. Next week, the NFL schedule releases, and we are going to be doing a full reaction of that next Sunday here on the Brands World Podcast. But for right now, this is how I would rank each division in the NFL. Starting with the AFC East, I think we all kind of know the Buffalo Bills are at the top of that division. Now, number 2, I would put Miami with the addition of Tyreek Hill over New England. So I would have Miami second, Patriots third, Jets fourth. But like I just got done saying, if Sauce Gardner, if Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, if these guys for the Jets can play and Zach Wilson takes a step forward, I think the Jets could be better than New England this year because New England may have gotten Devontae Parker, sure, but they lost J.C. Jackson. They lost Shaq Mason. They lost Ted Karras. They lost a lot of talent, and it feels like kind of a reset year for the New England Patriots. Now, moving on to the AFC West. This was the toughest division to predict. I do believe that all 4 of these teams could make the playoffs, at the end of the day. But I believe still that the Las Vegas Raiders, to me, right now, are the team to beat in this division. You had Darren Waller. You had Devontae Adams. To a team with Derek Carr, to a team with Josh Jacobs, with Hunter Renfrow, with Max Crosby, with Chandler Jones, and that defensive line. That is a L of a football team and an L of a 1-2 punch offensively. I think a little bit better than Kansas City, who obviously, again, the addition of Sky Moore, I think he's not going to be Tyreek Hill, but if he's damn pretty good close, it's going to open up the lanes again for Mecole Hardman, for Juju Smith-Schuster, for Travis Kelce. They're not going to be as explosive as they were with Tyreek Hill, but who knows? I don't think they're going to take too much of a step back. In the AFC West, then in third, I would place the Chargers. Just do not trust Brandon Staley that much as a coach, but they do got a lot of talent. Adding Khalil Mack and J.C. Jackson on the defensive end, adding the guard out of Boston College in the first round of the draft. They still got Asante Samuel Jr. They still got the two great receivers, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, of course, the great running back, Austin Eckler, and the QB, Justin Herbert. And in the AFC West, a lot of people think Denver is the team to beat in this division, and I don't. Listen, I don't think the receivers are that great. I don't think Jerry Jeudy is that special. I don't think Corwin Sutton is that special. I think they lost a really good tight end in Noah Fant, and I think their offensive line is suspect. Their secondary, obviously, with Patrick Surtain, Justin Simmons is great. Their defensive line, with the addition of Randy Gregory, Bradley Chubb, I think that will help their defensive line, but I'm still not sold on Denver. In the AFC North, I have it going Cincinnati, Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. I was torn on this because, as I just mentioned, Baltimore and Cleveland to me is a coin flip. Again, I think Cincinnati's in first. Pittsburgh is in fourth. I don't think Kenny Pickett is going to make that much of a difference for the Seahawks. They don't have the greatest offensive weapons, in my opinion. But I think the Ravens and the Browns are a real interesting case because I think the Browns with Deshaun Watson have overwhelmingly better talent than the Ravens. But as I just said, man, if you can run the ball in the regular season, Baltimore went 8-3 last year until Lamar Jackson got hurt the last 6 games of the year. I cannot get that out of my mind. I still think the Ravens are just a really good run football team, and we don't know if Deshaun Watson is going to get suspended or not. For that matter, I put the Ravens ahead of the Browns, and by the time we get to the season, if we know Watson's status, I will certainly put the Browns ahead of the Ravens. Now, in the AFC South, I got the Colts, Titans, Jags, and Texans. I think Tennessee, without a doubt, downgrades going from A.J. Brown to that Burks kid out of Arkansas. Listen, the kid could be a great receiver. They've compared him to A.J. Brown, but I don't understand it from Tennessee's perspective because of the fact that I believe if you have a wide receiver in the NFL, it doesn't matter what the money costs. Wide receivers need to be more like quarterbacks these days. I know Devontae Adams making $30 million. I know Tyreek Hill's making 25. I know A.J. Brown's making 25. I know the cost. And I know that there's receivers coming out of the draft every single year. But if you don't have receivers in this league, I don't think you're going anywhere. I don't think Tennessee is better than the Colts today, who I think upgraded the quarterback with Matt Ryan. There's been reports, obviously, in Tennessee that Malik Willis could take over here pretty shortly for Ryan Tannehill, which I do believe will be the case. So I think Tennessee is sort of resetting themselves. I do think Jacksonville is an improved team. I do love the Devin Lloyd pick in the first round, the linebacker to Utah. I thought he was their best pick. Again, I would have taken Aiden Hutchinson number 1 overall. That's neither here nor there. They did spend a lot of money in free agency on the offensive line and receivers like Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram to help Trevor Lawrence out, who I think with a grown-up in Doug Peterson will have a better year. I think that they will compete. I think that they will win 6 or 7 games. I think that they are the 3rd team in the division, though, and obviously Houston's in a total rebuild. They're going to find out if David Mills can play this year. They're in 4th. So when you look at the playoff picture, in my opinion, in the AFC, you've got Buffalo, Vegas, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis. Those are your division winners. And I think the Chiefs, Ravens, and Browns, if Deshaun Watson gets back, will be your 7 playoff teams. On the bubble, I kind of put the Chargers and the Broncos. Again, I think Denver's going to finish in 4th place, but they could certainly make the playoffs. These are teams I think are good, but I don't know if they're playoff teams. Those are Tennessee, Miami, New England, and Pittsburgh. And Prude will win games. We'll go with the Jags and the Jets. And obviously, Houston, we're not going to worry too much about Houston. From last year's playoffs, essentially the Colts will replace the Titans, and the Ravens and Browns replace the Steelers and the Patriots as your wild card teams. Now, in the NFC, this is how I have it going because the NFC is going to take a lot less explaining to do more than the AFC. Essentially, what I think happens is this. I think the Cowboys will miss the playoffs this year. I think the Vikings will replace the Cowboys. I think the Eagles will end up overtaking Dallas and winning the NFC East. So when you look at the NFC teams here, I have Philly, Rams, Green Bay, and Tampa winning their division. In second place, I have Dallas, San Francisco, Minnesota, and the Saints. Third, Washington, Arizona, who I think the DeAndre Hopkins suspension of 6 games will affect them. Detroit and Chicago. I don't like the Bears hiring a Matt Eberflus. I think you need to go with an offensive mind in today's National Football League. I don't know much if Justin Fields can play, and I think the Lions are on the rise. I think the Bears are going to be one of those surprise kind of bad teams this year, and I would put the Lions over the Bears. Now, in the NFC, as I already mentioned, I believe your playoff teams will be the Eagles, Rams, Packers, and Bucks. Your wildcard team will be the Niners, with or without Jimmy Garoppolo or Trey Lance, their quarterback, Arizona, and Minnesota. Again, the only change there, Minnesota replaces Dallas, and the Eagles go from a wild card to a division winner. But the rest of those teams, obviously, Tampa Bay come back. We know they're going to make the playoffs. Rams come back. We know they're going to make the playoffs. San Francisco is still good enough to make the playoffs. I think Arizona is still good enough to make the playoffs. I think Green Bay, even with the loss of Devontae Adams, they went out. They got a couple good receivers. They got 2 good running backs. I think Green Bay is still better than Minnesota a little bit. I know the Vikings made a lot of additions. They have a new head coach, the Rams offensive coordinator, but I got to see Minnesota to believe them, though I think that they are a playoff team. So that division could swap with Minnesota and Green Bay, though again, I do think both teams make the postseason. So overall, when you look at my Super Bowl bubble, I would put the Bills, Bengals, Chiefs, Browns, Ravens, Rams, Bucks. Those are the teams who I believe could win the Super Bowl this season coming up. My playoff bubble, these are teams who cannot win the Super Bowl, but I believe that they will make the playoffs. They are the Raiders, Colts, Packers, Niners, Cardinals, Vikings, Eagles. Just outside the playoffs, I believe will be Denver, Chargers, and Dallas. Playoff teams from last year that I think take a step back are the Patriots, Steelers, and Titans. I don't think they're going to be as good as they were last season. These are not playoff teams. They will be close to it, or they will compete and win games. They are the Dolphins, Jaguars, Jets, Saints, Commanders, Lions, Bears. And teams that I don't think we really need to pay any attention to, I think they'll be in the bottom 5 of this league. Giants, Seahawks, Falcons, Panthers, Texans. In the case of most of those, obviously Seattle, Carolina, Houston, I think they're just going to be tanking, trying to look for a quarterback. You can even throw Atlanta in there as well. Giants, they'll be looking for a quarterback by Thanksgiving. Again, they fixed it up with the trenches, but Daniel Jones is not the answer at quarterback for them. So that is my full outlook on kind of the NFL going into the season. I know that was a long-winded take. However, we will be reviewing it again next week when we go over the NFL schedule.